My guest today is Fishkin. Rand is someone who many of us, or at least me personally, learned SEO from back in the day. He famously co-founded Moz, which I believe was one of the very first SaaS companies in the SEO space. But these days Rand no longer calls himself an SEO. Not only that, he claims to not even use much SEO to grow SparkToro, the new company which he co-founded. So how is he growing it then? Well, that was one of the main topics of our conversation. We also discussed the pitfalls of marketing attribution and how much of their marketing work at SparkToro is strategic versus opportunistic. I really enjoyed our conversation with Rand, and I hope you will too. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tim Soulo, and you're listening to Ahrefs Podcast.
Ahrefs Podcast.
Okay, so happy you agreed to be a guest on my show, if I can call it a show. For having trust in me. And I know you as a very kind person who always like to share, which kind of goes into a question: do you ever turn down podcast interviews?
Yes, I do. Probably more than I should, but yeah, I get a lot of requests from, I would say, folks who run podcasts sort of outside the industries that I'm trying to generally reach. And so in a lot of those cases, I have to decline. Plus, I think if I said yes to everything, it would be, I don't know, 10 podcasts a week. That'd probably be a little too much.
Yeah, I imagine these days you don't have to pitch yourself to podcasts as many of us do. You get so many incoming requests that you have to actually turn them down.
I mean, I wish I could say yes to everybody, but it just wouldn't be practical.
Yeah. No, I absolutely understand. So outside of the podcast not being in a niche where you can reach your target audience, do you have any other ways to evaluate them? So for example, do you look at the person behind them? Do they have an audience? And like, what are other factors to evaluate?
To be honest, the other biggest one is how busy I am at the time. So when folks hit me up and I am, I have more time and my calendar for the next few weeks looks clearer, I often say yes. And when that's not the case, I'll reply and tell people to come back at me. I think the other thing, I could look at audience size, but oddly enough, I have found there's not a great correlation between audience size, especially for small and medium podcasts. Like if somebody has, I have an audience of, 500 people versus 2,000 versus 75, right? Or whatever my, subscription numbers are, that does not indicate necessarily how many people are going to listen to my episode with them. So it's a little bit funny on the metric side. If it's a huge podcast and, they have 100,000 people on their email list or whatever, sure, right? Everyone hates marketers, something like that. It's going to be pretty big, and most episodes, no matter who the guest is, will get listenership. But very frequently, I see that the relevance of our conversation, how the host positions the talk, the types of questions that they ask, and then the relevance to the audience who's listening and where they promote it, their social channels, that actually tends to have a bigger impact. So it's a little, it's not as reliable as looking at, whatever, estimated traffic numbers or something like that.
I actually want to point out what you said there in terms of evaluating, where you said, like, if you have free time. I think that's kind of counterintuitive because, like, with different marketing strategies, a lot of people focus like what kind of audience can I reach? What kind of resources would I need? But like, kind of the opportunity cost. Like, am I busy with something else right now that requires my attention? Or should I just like dedicate an hour of my time doing this, even if it doesn't seem like the biggest opportunity, but kind of like I just finished a big project. So I think this is very cool. And this is, I guess, not something that marketers would report to their board. Or like, no. I had some free time, so I went to a bunch of podcasts, but it makes sense.
Yeah. And I would say too, there's a serendipitous power to it. So sometimes I will note, for example, that several times I've been a guest, one of the first guests on someone's relatively new podcast. They have almost no audience. And after I say yes, they'll come back to me a year, 2, 3 years later and say, hey, you helped me start my podcast. Now I have 50,000 listeners. I would love to have you back on. Those relationships are fantastic, right? And if I hadn't said yes in the first place, would they have come back to me and recommended me to someone else, connected me with a host, connected me with a person who they thought, hey, this person loves to invest in the kinds of companies that you're building. Maybe you should talk to them, Rand, and have a conversation. And it's those serendipitous things that you cannot possibly know at the time you say yes to that provide future value that I'm optimizing for in a lot of cases. And that's a good reason why when I have some bandwidth, I'll say yes to even folks who have very little audience overlap. I did a pharmaceutical industry podcast with someone.
Okay.
Yeah, a couple of months ago. It went great. I don't know whether it'll turn into something, but it wouldn't surprise me if in the years ahead it does. I got invited to a conference as a result of one of those, and they bought 500 copies of my book. And so, this stuff is not, I don't know, it's not just direct. And part of it too, I don't know if you found this, Tim, but in the early years of my career, there were some people in the marketing industry. One was certainly Danny Sullivan, who wasn't at Google at the time, right? He was running search engine strategies like way back in the day. And he helped me out so much, even though I was nobody. I was an anonymous person on his forum. There wasn't even social media. He couldn't look me up. But he was incredibly kind, gave me tickets to his event and let me come and cover it, even though my audience was this big at the time. Those kinds of career-making moves, I want to pay that forward, right? I want to be kind to the next generation of folks who are trying to build their audience, their businesses. Yeah.
This segues me nicely into the next question. But before I ask it, I do agree with you that podcast is not just getting yourself in front of someone else's audience, but actually connecting with them, because you get to speak to a person for an hour or whatever time you have, and you get to know them better, establish connections. So this is a great way to network with people from all around the world. Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the big reasons why I am doing this. I want to talk to so many people, and I might as well record those conversations as I'm picking their brain on as you can see, I'm asking questions that are kind of interesting to me. So I started a podcast, and I want to know your experience. So, and the question that I'm segueing into is, you said some people come back to you and say, "Oh, you helped me to kickstart your podcast," and you also mentioned that it's about how many people would listen to an episode with you specifically, and it seems to be super common in launching and promoting a podcast. The growth strategy is to ask your guests to share it. So given that you go to a lot of podcast interviews, I would imagine a lot of people email you later and ask Rand, so here are some snippets, or the podcast episode is out, can you share it? And basically, if you are doing, I don't know, one interview per week or something like that, you cannot just inundate your audience with your own interviews. So I wonder how you reply those people.
Yeah, so I do suggest to everybody, and I think this is true, no matter how you are crafting content, whether it's your podcast, your YouTube channel, you're doing events, you're doing webinars, I tell everyone, get that 60-second, really compelling video with audio and add the attribution, add the labeling, make the guests look good, make sure that there's, text so that if folks have their speakers off or their headphones off, they can see it. Those clips, sharing one of those a week is no problem at all, as long as the clip is really useful. Right? As long as it's providing value to the audience, whether they go and check out the actual podcast where it happened or not, making that compelling snippet of content be something that can stand alone is what will get me, and I've found almost anyone else, to share as well. So we've done this with Spark Together, right? Where we have a little clip that, I've recorded for our speakers, sort of being oh, here's Tim, and he's accomplished all these amazing things, and he's going to talk about this incredible thing. And when I send you, or Amanda sends you that clip, it makes you look great, right? So of course you're going to share, and I don't mean you particularly, but the idea is that you make the person who you're sharing out with look great. And they're of course going to want to promote to their audience, especially if it's something that they're passionate about sharing. You know, you pick one of those, the clips tend to do really well.
That's a very nice advice. I also think that instead of taking that clip and sending it to them and asking like, can you share this clip? What you can do is you can share that clip on your own Twitter or LinkedIn, tag them, and if they like it, they would retweet it or reshare it to their audience. So, and that's a much more, you're not asking them to do like, but you're kind of baiting them. I think back in the day we called it ego bait, when you like baiting peoples with good content with them and they were retweeted.
Yeah, and I think you can, I like doing it simultaneously. So sharing it out from our channels and also sending them the native clip. The native clip is just, it often performs better on a social channel, you know, LinkedIn. Well, Twitter is, I don't know what's going on there, but, you know, Threads stuff does really well. Instagram, native clips do extraordinarily well. Even Facebook, I found my Facebook page with a native video clip, as long as there's no link, it does really, really well. So, you know, tough to drive people back to a podcast show or an episode or a subscribe link, but you can get a lot of engagement and then leave it in the comments or those kinds of things to get the additional you know, value from it.
Well, according to my observation, most people who run podcasts, they don't bother with that. They just send you links to published episodes and they ask you to share it. And I'm usually trying to use kind of a version of what I've learned from you some, I don't know, 10 years ago when I reached out to you with an article published on my blog. And you said, Tim, like the article looks good, but it's not, I don't know, groundbreaking. And I'm like very particular about my social sharing. I try to make sure that I respect my audience and I share like only the most interesting stuff with them. So I kind of try to reply to people with this sort of justification. I'm saying I go to a few interviews per month and like I'm afraid I cannot share them all, so I usually choose like the best ones, and I'm sorry I cannot like share yours, and yeah, but it's still hard to say no to people, right?
It is. Very frequently when folks send me the event episode and they say, hey, would you share this with your audience? I'll reply and say, can you make me a few native video clips? And those are what tend to resonate with my audience. Unfortunately, I would say it's still like 20 or 30% of people who actually reply and go through that labor.
Yeah.
But the people who do, those clips tend to do well, right? So it's a sort of you know, value add for both sides, right? Because that video content also becomes useful to me in terms of engaging my audience, keeping top of mind for them about, you know, what we're talking about at that time, that kind of thing.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And the next topic that we can segue into from doing podcast interviews is ROI and attribution. So given that you go to a lot of podcast interviews and I know your stance on like ROI and attribution, I wonder if you even pay attention to that at all. Do you have self-attribution at SparkToro? Do people tell you where they came from? No self-attribution.
No, we don't ask. I mean, I'm curious, you know, do you ask, and if you ask, how accurate do you think that data is? My experience has been that it's low, but I'm curious if you feel differently.
So I read your article. I remember where you mentioned about self-attribution, that people have like wrong memories, or they tend to gravitate towards things that are more popular and they don't remember like smaller touch points. So I absolutely agree with you. Like we cannot trust this data precisely, but we do have a form. Where did you hear about Ahrefs? And people fill in all sorts of stuff, and it is useful to us because, for example, whenever we do some sponsorship of a podcast, or we sponsor some newsletter, or we sponsor some influencer, once in a while, their name or their brand would show up in those self-attributions. So people would say, oh, like I don't know, I heard you on a 30 Hacker podcast, or Pat Flynn mentioned you, or blah, blah, blah. And it takes only like 1 or 2 mentions for us to know that, okay, people heard us, as opposed to sponsoring someone and getting absolutely zero mentions of their name. But yeah, it's not that we massively rely on self-attribution. The latest thing we're trying to do, we're trying to export those into CSV and try to play around with ChatGPT, if it can filter it for us, because we have a lot of registrations every week, and we want to see if we can like automatically categorize, because going through them manually is just terrible. But yeah, we do think that self-attribution is helpful, because even for the members of our marketing team, if they know that they did some kind of webinar, or they published some interesting study, or they were at a conference, and either their name or their work is mentioned in self-attribution, this gives them a self-accomplishment. So it's not necessarily the way for us to justify spending budgets on those things, but kind of all those side benefits.
Yeah, interesting. I like that. I mean, one thing I have seen for sure is that when you ask for self-attribution and folks have, and you make big sort of brand marketing investments, especially in channels or sources of influence that are already well known, right? That someone be able to call to mind, Pat Flynn, or whatever it is. On Hacker News, you were mentioned by Lily Ray on Google, something like that. Okay, well, those people are memorable, they're well known, they're likely to come up. If it was a long tail of a bunch of smaller podcasts, smaller sources of influence, articles that are on sites where people can't quickly remember the name, they don't have an association with it, but it happened to rank in the search results or happened to come across their LinkedIn feed or whatever, those types of things get minimized. And thus, my only fear and concern is that marketing teams or marketers who use those will bias towards the biggest sources and remove or not count the value of the long tail. To your point about 0 versus 1, right? If we get 1 mention of this thing versus 0, well, that's not statistically significant. It's very possible that 100 people came to you in part because they heard about you on this thing that got either 0 mentions or 1 mention. It's risky, right?
I absolutely agree with you. And I guess the way we approach that, so we don't usually cancel any kind of marketing activity or marketing channel if it's not mentioned in self-attribution, because like you said, people might not remember, or like people that are coming from this channel might not be in the mood right now to tell you that, like, to give you the self-attribution. But the fact that an allegedly big channel gives us 1 or 2 mentions means that a smaller channel should give us like 0.3 mentions, which is a non-mention, right? Like, yeah, we don't cancel smaller channels because we see them, but we appreciate seeing bigger channels, or like we appreciate seeing some smaller activities that we do in self-attribution.
You've got the size, you have the numbers to be able to justify it a little better, or at least sort of build it up. SparkToro is, I don't know, 100th the size of Ahrefs. So, very, very different statistically.
So again, back to podcast interviews, we're going to close the topic. You don't care about tracking like ROI or what it does for you. You just intrinsically know that it works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's also I would break that away from just podcasts, and I would say that is true for webinars, conferences, and events, which are notoriously impossible to track ROI or attribution on. Also very, very difficult to do it with any social media mention, especially an individual social media mention. You can sort of, oh, hey, I noticed that our blog posts that we share on social tend to get more traffic than articles that we don't share on social, But that type of attribution, very, very difficult. Mentions from smaller accounts on social. There's obviously buzz that builds up. And my my value for all those smaller sources of influence is that essentially taken together, they can be as good or better than, your money keywords in SEO or a big spend on pay-per-click advertising. But they're way less competitive and they're way more fun. Oh my God, so much more fun to have to do a podcast with you than it is to, hey, I'm going to, I don't know, go to my Meta ads campaign and run a bunch of Instagram targeting and send Instagram $10,000. Like, let me spend an hour with Tim.
Or write 10 articles on some boring informational keywords that everyone has already covered like 100 years ago.
Yeah, SEO, it's tough to get passionate about it. Like, especially that content creation in the kinds of ways that Google wants content created now. It's so damn boring compared to what it used to be.
We'll get to it later in the podcast, but now since we started the topic of marketing attribution, I think you are the only person on my radar, or at least a person with a sizable audience, who is openly critical of marketing attribution and who is promoting the fact that things should be done because like common sense and logic says that they should work, or kind of you explain on the background how these things work, but not necessarily track those numbers in some analytics software. So I guess my first question is, given that you are so vocal about it, probably a lot of people quite often try to argue with you. So have you ever seen marketing analytics and marketing attribution implemented on like super high level where you can say, okay, this makes sense, this actually works? So what's your experience?
So I've talked to a number of folks at what I'd call big consumer brands who have a advertising budget in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars a quarter, and they have attribution tracking for their digital ad spend that I think makes good sense. Like, I will not argue that the econometrics, marketing mix modeling systems that they build, which often use some forms of machine learning as well, I think those are actually pretty darn good, right? They can say, if we pull back 20% of our Instagram spend, we would expect to see a drop of 2% of our incremental signups. Great. I think that's fantastic. And I agree that they have enough data to quantify and qualify what that incremental lift is that comes from any given channel, any given paid digital ad channel. However, I do not agree that they have full funnel, full marketing attribution, and some of them claim to. Some of them claim that they can also measure PR. Some of them claim that they can measure the value of conferences and events, that they can measure the value of, their founder or leadership or team members going on podcasts and interviews and doing webinars, that they can quantify the value of all their content marketing, of their social media, organic social media investments. Those I do not agree with, because very frankly, the way that tracking works today, which removes so much of where traffic initially started, where the concept for that potential consumer purchase or interest started, I don't believe you can tie that to its original source in the way that these marketers pretend that they can. So that bothers me a lot, and I think it creates a lot of paid media bias, right? It's, Google search is responsible for this traffic. Google search didn't create the demand. Something else created the demand. You don't know what. You're not measuring it. You're not investing in it. And you're biased to believe that you can invest in it. That concerns me quite a bit. I am not, Tim, I am not against measurement, but I am against believing that attribution measures everything and that it can be perfectly attributed or even estimated attributed when it comes to organic.
I also learned the point about big platforms having interest in making you think that they are the source of attribution. I think I got it from one of your articles. I think that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, especially those people that bid on their brand terms and they see that their brand terms are bringing them customers and they're like, whoa, our paid spend is working. Like, kudos to pay-per-click team. And like, but who created those?
Yeah.
Sorry?
Google's Performance Max, right? That essentially they shove all the spend into places where they know you're already driving, likely to convert customers. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and again, with those platforms, it is so easy to kind of track this attribution. They put a pixel on your website, and whenever the same person with that pixel converts, this is us. We did this, like absolutely ignoring everything else. So yeah, I absolutely love that point.
I was going to say this, which is it's not completely marketers' faults, right? Like I think the big platforms did two things. One, years ago, Facebook had very good attribution, right? There was not the dark social problem when your Facebook page sent you traffic, when somebody else's Facebook page sent you traffic, mobile or desktop, it would show the URL, right? It would say like, hey, this Facebook post, even if you didn't have permission to view that post with your login or whatever, Facebook would show you, oh, there was a post from this page about that must have linked to you, and so you could see it. Google used to send you organic keywords. They would tell you every keyword that sent traffic to your site, every page that they landed on. All of that data was right in there. Twitter's analytics used to be quite excellent. The Twitter analytics dashboard would tell you all sorts of things about your audience and your growth and how many clicks you drove, all this kind of stuff. A tremendous number of those were lost in the 2014 to 2017 era. Part of that was on the social side, Cambridge Analytica, and part of it was Google making the decision essentially to remove keywords for privacy, but then if you pay for them, they'll give them to you anyway. And so that loss of tracking, and now the new problems of ad blockers, which are incredibly prevalent, right? I think something like 30% of internet users have an ad blocker of some kind or another, or a browser that automatically blocks. The rise of, or the loss of third-party cookie data, right? So Safari blocking those completely. Chrome is going to phase them out this year. A lot of first-party cookies being undroppable. The GDPR, like what has happened the last few years has been completely different to the era that I grew up in digital marketing, when a lot of this stuff was so measurable, so perfectly measurable, that I think you could build reasonable attribution models. So I don't think it was crazy in 2012 or even 13 to say, hey, we don't have perfect attribution, but we are good enough. We can measure organic close to as well as we can measure paid. We can see the really full life cycle of what's going on here. We don't need to worry about vanity metrics because we can build these sophisticated enough dashboards that can attribute our conversions to the things that we've done on and off our site. And in 2023, I just don't think that's possible. I don't think it's reasonable to make that claim because of these big changes that have happened in the ecosystem. And unfortunately, a lot of CMOs and VPs of marketing and owners of companies who might be clients for SEO agencies and content marketing agencies, they haven't caught up to that reality yet, right? They want to believe that. And so they're looking for their marketers, their agencies, their marketing teams to provide that proof. Prove to me, how do I know that the thing you're doing isn't just a waste of time?
Also, I would argue that 10 to 15 years ago, the actual web was more simple. There were like less apps, less messengers, less of the so-called dark social. So a lot of stuff was happening kind of in front of your eyes. And yeah, you actually answered the question that I was struggling to recall. And that was, yeah, it seems that digital marketers are thinking that we have so much data to work with that we can use like for attribution and for understanding where to put our budgets, where to put our efforts. But yeah, it seems that the data was actually dwindling in the past few years. Even Apple with those like privacy things that on Apple you like ask app not to track, and this again with Facebook also. A few of my friends who were very successful promoting their products on Facebook, they said that the quality of Facebook being able to find the right audience went down a lot. Plus, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think HTTPS doesn't pass referral data. Is that true? Or like
HTTP to HTTPS doesn't pass referral data. So HTTP S to S should pass. Okay. HTTP to HTTPS does not pass by so yes, that is also an attribution or a measurement problem, right? That's lost, although most of the web is secure at this point, the overwhelming majority. But yeah, for example, like when Geraldine's website, my wife's website, sends me traffic to my website, she's not secure, right? Because we'll pay for a security certificate for her. And so I can't see traffic that she sends to me, for example.
Okay. Yeah, I remember there was some technical detail, but I didn't remember what it was. So yeah, it seems that at a certain point, I don't know, some 20 or so years ago, when marketers starting to tap into digital marketing and do marketing online, they were like, oh, we can actually see how many people are visiting our website. We actually have those numbers, as opposed to like a billboard where you don't know how many people actually see it. So they were like, let's measure everything. This is so scientific. We can do this. We can prove budgets, blah, blah, blah. And to an extent, as you are saying, it seems to have been working out back in the days. But then like we were getting less. And again, a brilliant post that Amanda published at SparkToro blog about zero-click. What was the term?
Zero-click marketing.
Zero-click marketing. Yeah, zero-click content. I think the term was zero-click content,
right?
Yeah, basically the platforms are not incentivized to send people to your website. They are making you contribute content natively. So how do you attribute like how your tweet, for example, you tweet about your product, you do like a small sample video, you are not sending people anywhere. How do you know if it worked or not? How do you justify how much time you want to spend on sharing your, I don't know, product information, your company ideology, or like some branding stuff on LinkedIn, on Twitter? There's just no way.
Well, so I disagree with that. I think that you can, if you need to measure that investment and then compare it against other things, what you can't do is say, I attribute 7% of this sale to people watching that video on LinkedIn or Twitter or Threads. But you can say, we're going to invest in this for 90 days very heavily. We're going to put out a video a week. We're going to see what kinds of engagement we get. We're going to judge the end of those 90 days by the vanity metrics. Do we get more and more impressions of the video, more minutes watched, right? LinkedIn will tell you minutes watched. Threads will tell you minutes watched. So you can see those numbers go. Or you can also measure in terms of, hey, we saw a lift in conversion rate on our website. We saw a lift in branded search volume. More people searched for whatever, SparkToro or SparkToro V2 or whatever it was in the video. We saw more people going to the landing page for the thing that was in the video. Well, look, we can't say for certain that this absolutely 100%, nothing else led to this. It could have been that that video was seen by somebody who then promoted it in their email newsletter, and we should really give that email newsletter more attribute. But whatever, I don't care. I am willing to make essentially experimental investments and then measure the results of those investments over time. You're kind of using gut feel, but you're using more what I'd call 20th century style measurement. Right? When Coca-Cola ran a billboard, to use your billboard example, on on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and they said, well, how much can we attribute to those billboards? Is that billboard campaign effective? Well, what they would do is they would run 10 billboards in Chicago and a different 10 billboards in Milwaukee and a different 10 billboards in Detroit. And then they'd look at same store sales quarter over quarter, and they'd say, the one in Detroit seems to really be the best performer. We saw, same store sales go up 4.5%. We're taking the Detroit campaign and making that nationwide. And you can't, Look, no one from Coca-Cola was claiming, I know for certain that when Tim and Rand walked into that grocery store, they bought Coca-Cola because they drove by the billboard. That's not what they're saying. They're saying this billboard worked better than these other billboards. And it did work. We can see the lift. So that's what you have to do. But you also have to be willing to do something almost no marketer, almost no leadership team is willing to do, and test cutting it off. Right?
Yeah.
You have to test not doing it. And that is really hard for folks. So advertising, you got to test turning off your ads. And a lot of people are too scared to do it.
That's what we did, I think, last year. And I think I left a comment on your blog. What we did, we turned off all our advertising for a month. I think it was month of October, probably. And then the next month, we doubled it, kind of for an extra effect, because we saved 1 month of advertising. We decided to move it to the next month and see like if that would be like a dip and then an uplift. So we didn't see a major dip. That was interesting. We canceled all advertising and we didn't see, well, maybe it was a little, but maybe in, I don't know, in single digit %. But then when we doubled our advertising, like that was a bit more kind of noticeable, maybe deep plus like double spent. And we did see like uplift. Plus we saw like more registrations coming that month. So yeah, we did kind of validate that our kind of advertising spend is working. But then again, we were spending on Facebook, on Twitter, on Google, maybe some ads on Quora or something like that. So then we have to identify which one is more effective. And then we advertise different things, because you can advertise like your product and your landing pages, or you can be advertising your content. And those things might be, so there's a lot of tests involved to figure out how this actually work. But yeah, I do agree with you. It definitely makes sense to kind of try to correlate in your mind if you do something and if you see like uplift or something. I definitely agree with you. Plus, I think I've also seen you mention this, which I'm also a big advocate for, to see the performance of each individual thing you do within that platform. So for example, if you post on LinkedIn and you see that you get tons of likes, you get tons of comments, tons of views, and there was like some kind of product mention, company mention, or something that works toward your company, you can give yourself a pat on the back that you're doing something right. Because if this gets exposure, if people learn about it, then that is essentially marketing. You don't necessarily need to tie it to the bottom line to know that it should be working.
That's exactly right. And I think, there's two things going on that's very challenging. One is, especially when you do those in organic kinds of investments, if you do 1 or 2 or even 3, let's say I have a video about the new version of the product and it performs well. That does not mean that people are going to go from, hey, I watched that video, that was pretty cool, to I'm going to remember that. I'm going to associate it with SparkToro. I'm going to recall it again when I have need for the features and data that product offered. No, right? You need that consistent time over time, again and again and again, being present in someone's mind for them to take that action. And so a lot of organic campaigns, unfortunately, get shut down before they've had a chance to perform the job that they need to perform, which is to create that awareness. And so this is, I think this is one of the toughest things, is to realize how marketing works and invest in marketing the way that it works on the future promise of getting good at doing that thing and being able to show it with lift-based measurement. And in the meantime, the only thing you really have to rely on is the vanity metrics: views, impressions, likes, reshares, reposts, new followers, all those, on social media, or when it comes to search, right? Like branded search volume, or clicks, or traffic, or, whatever, keyword rankings, those kinds of things. And it's like, gosh, those vanity metrics are tough to pay attention to, and they're tough to get a client, a team, a boss on board with. But they're kind of all you have to work with until you've built up the muscle memory in someone's mind about your brand and enough to make that difference, especially for a considered product, right? If you're selling, whatever, a cheap good, consumer good, a $5 bag with a picture of your favorite video game character on it. You can measure it pretty quickly, right? You're instantly creating the demand. You're instantly supplying it. You're going to see that turnover, that lift very fast or not. If you're talking about selling B2B software to a professional services crowd, really different. You're talking about selling home contracting services to someone who's going to take 6 or 9 months to decide which contractor they're going to use. You can't be reliant on what happened with this one video that one time.
That's a great point. I absolutely agree with this. But until now, we were kind of speaking in more general terms, but I want to get more specific and talk about how you folks do marketing at SparkToro. So
sure.
You famously mentioned not once that you're not you're not really relying on SEO, even with all your track record in SEO. For SparkToro, you're not interested in doing SEO. So what are the staples of your marketing at SparkToro? How do you guys do it?
Yeah, the core of it, the core of SparkToro's sort of marketing engine is we have a completely free version. So, at my old company, Moz, we had like a free trial. You had to, you sign up to use the tool, you put in your credit card, you get 30 days free. And then at the end of the 30 days, the credit card would be charged and then you'd have full access to the product. SparkToro, it is, you can sign up for free, use the product for free for forever. So it's a freemium tool rather than a free trial. And that engine sort of powers everything that SparkToro does. People come to the website, they've heard about SparkToro somewhere, hopefully somewhere relevant. Because it's very frictionless and easy to try, they'll put in their email address, they'll give the product a spin. If the product's not a match, it's not that big a deal because we also, if they choose to, they can subscribe to product updates, the email newsletter, webinars, that kind of thing. So I would say it's about 50 or 60% of people who sign up for SparkToro who also sign up to get email notifications from us, newsletter, blog, whatever it is. That really, really drives our marketing engine. And then everything else that we do, everything external. So social media marketing, content marketing, the blog itself, webinars, podcasts, interviews, YouTube channels, live streams. I speak at obviously a bunch of events and that kind of stuff. All of that just feeds into the essentially sign up for free and capture someone's email and then have them subscribe to updates and send them notifications. And then over the course of 9 months, 12 months, 18 months, oftentimes they'll see something in their email from us that makes them say, oh, I actually do really need that. Like I need that thing that SparkToro offers to do this, solve this problem that I have at my company, at my consultancy, whatever. And then they become customers for a month, a year, 2 years, whatever it is. That's our marketing engine in a nutshell.
Let's expand that because I absolutely get the freemium model. I get the email newsletter. Both those things are kind of to familiarize your potential customer with what the product does, plus to retain them to keep in touch. But you mentioned something important, which we need to discuss, is people who heard about SparkToro come to your website and then they try out the free thing. They sign up for email newsletter. So I'm interested in that heard element. And you mentioned you do conferences, you do podcast interviews like this one. You're active on social. You and Amanda are like having a lot of success on social media. Yada yada yada. But I guess I'm wondering how strategic you are with that. So, for example, every quarter, you and Amanda would sit down. Okay, we need to do like 5 posts on LinkedIn. We need to do a webinar. We need to do like this Spark Together, your online event. So how strategic you are, or is it more like something we discussed at the very beginning of the episode where you said, like, what do I have time and passion for in the next couple weeks? I'm going to take this project. And you have like a backlog of project and you're just choosing depending on what's going on. You're choosing your next priority. So how do you strategize how to kind of let the world know about SparkToro? So we're talking about kind of the top of the funnel acquisition.
So we do, I would say, 10% strategic, the way you describe, right? Where we say, hey, we believe these publications, these sources of influence, this whatever event, this podcast, this YouTube channel, we think these are very influential to our audience. We want to be in front of them either in the next quarter or sometime this year, or we're going to reach out and pitch them, right? And that strategy list is 10%, maybe even less. It could be as low as 5% of what we do. Almost everything else, 95% is opportunistic. So Amanda and I, as you mentioned, are both very active on social media. A part of that is, yes, to share content and, sort of amplify our brand. But a big part of it, and I think not enough marketers and brands use social media for this, is to be part of conversations that can lead us to interesting people and publications and sources of influence who see what we say, who engage with us there, and then we form a connection and a relationship with them. Conferences and events are a huge part of that for me too, because as you know, meeting someone in person versus, a comment on LinkedIn, it's just a totally different vibe. And I'm at an event in New York, I meet someone, we shake hands, we chat for a little bit. If I drop them a line a month later, 6 months later, they're going to reply to me, right? Like we have that in-person connection. That human connection is incredibly powerful at driving future opportunities and results. And so that's what I'd call opportunistic. We say yes to lots of things, and I would say sort of keep our eyes and ears peeled for potentially interesting things, right? Like this person reaches our audience, or this publication seems to have good overlap. Let's engage with them. Let's see if that can lead to something. And then a little bit of, we sort of, right? Consume our own stuff, right? So we use SparkToro to find what are web marketers and audience researchers and people who do persona building and all that kind of stuff. What are they doing actively online? And then that's more like once every 6 months to a year, we'll try and find those publications and people, and then we'll, prioritize some list of which ones we want to go after.
I absolutely love that. I absolutely love how kind of opportunistic, as you say, you are. Instead of like doing those plans, strategies, KPIs, just like, do I have any amazing opportunities that would be better than what I have in the backlog? Let's pursue them. And I guess my question to you, because you have quite an experience of working in like a big mature company and leading a big mature company, do you think if SparkToro would grow to the size of Moz, like just hypothetically, would that dynamic change? Is it like natural for bigger companies to be less opportunistic and more kind of boring and strategic and predictable? Well, you get where I'm going with this.
Yes, absolutely. I think the answer to your question your second question is absolutely yes. Bigger companies with more formalized structures, more formalized teams, run off of process rather than individual intuition. And that I don't personally love those kinds of environments. That's not what makes me excited about going to work. For some people, building those processes, working inside those processes is very fulfilling. They really like having that structured environment, knowing exactly what their workday entails, knowing what their KPIs are, hitting those KPIs, maybe beating those KPIs. But that doesn't mean it's right for me. Just as my approach, right? Our very opportunistic approach and very, 10% strategy, 90%, let's just see what happens. That doesn't mean our approach is for everyone either. I would argue that when you are small, or smaller, right? So SparkToro is well under, $10 million in annual revenue. And I would say probably up to that point, this system that we have works very nicely. And that is the time that you will spend building those strategies, having those meetings, setting the KPIs, measuring all that stuff, building the measurement dashboard, doing the reporting, all of those things will consume so much effort that you could instead, if you took it and repurposed it towards what I'd call sort of tactical, opportunistic things, you could be wrong 8 out of 10 times and you would still win. You would still net win with hey, we just kind of take what comes, because this is so arduous and time consuming. And, I don't have an analyst team. I don't have somebody who can build out these dashboards for me. Casey is focused on the product. That's not something he has time for. He doesn't have interest in it either. We would have to hire okay, let me get an engineer. Let me get an analyst role. Let me go build out a bunch of our infrastructure to support all of this. I'm going to need some more software that I pay for that measures a bunch of these things. Amanda, you're now spending, a third of your time on reporting rather than actually doing the work. I think it would be a net loss, right? I think we would lose out even if we were much more perfect in our strategic targeting versus being opportunistic. And I would say that probably is true all the way up to somewhere in the $10 million per year range for us. At Moz's size, right? Moz was around 50. It probably made more sense. But even there, Tim, I personally was very opportunistic. And so were a couple of I'd say key influential people. So, Dr. Pete when I was there, Brittany Muller when I was there, Ruth Burr when she was running things. All of us were very opportunistic. The marketing team as a whole under the CMO, the couple of CMOs that I had, they were more structured, right? And they had more of that reporting. But also a lot of that reporting, like we talked about earlier, was much more possible. Moz had a sophisticated dashboard where I knew which piece of content contributed to a conversion with much more confidence than I could possibly build something like that today because of all those restrictions that we talked about earlier. So a little bit of it is the world changed, right? The internet changed, the fundamental structure changed, and some of it is the size of the company too.
I absolutely and wholeheartedly agree with that ideology. This is something we do at Ahrefs. I'm always a big fan of let's just do it to the best of our ability. Let's just ship it and then see how it performs, what kind of feedback we get, and then iterate from there. And this is exactly how kind of this podcast came to be, because originally I came up with the idea of a podcast called This Never Happened. And the idea was that I would interview people and I would try to push them kind of out of their comfort zone and ask some questions that they wouldn't typically answer. But the podcast would be live. So whoever was live on the call, they learned the answer. And then this never happened. So these people never gave this response. It didn't fly. So this was supposed to be close to our community of paying customers. We tried a few. No. So we decided, okay, let's publish the recordings for 24 hours and give people opportunity to watch it and then delete it. Also not much demand. So you're like, okay, let's just publish the recordings and change the name of This Didn't Happen to something else and just publish the recordings permanently, but for our closed community of customers. So if you're not a paying customer of Ahrefs, you cannot get access to it. Also, not a lot of views. So now we're doing this podcast and it would be a public podcast, but I still figured out a way to kind of make something unique for our community. So from every episode, we're trying to cut out, 5 to 7 minutes with something interesting and post it privately to our community. And within the podcast, there would probably be this section is exclusive for the members of our community. Right, Please visit community.ahrefs.com and you'll see it there. So we're still kind of, through iteration, we figured how to do best of those worlds, create some unique content for members of our community so that they would value being members of the community, and have a public podcast that is not behind some kind of, I don't know, paywall or gate or something like that, that we can publish, that we can promote on Twitter, on YouTube, whatever. So yeah, I'm a big fan of iterating rather than like trying to strategize and report. And yeah, reporting, like so much time. I'm like, as our team grows, I also understand that because I'm no longer the one doing everything myself, I need to understand if members of my team are effective with what they do. And if I can look in, give them some advice, optimize some things, trim some fat. And for that, I do need some kind of reports to understand what is happening. But still, on those reports, one of the most important things for me is the output. So how much have you done in a given month or a quarter? This is the most important thing over everything else. And I don't want people to spend a week on their report, because that week is not spent doing things, right? But yeah. But yeah, I agree with you that as the company goes bigger, I was avoiding like reports, team calls and all of that. But yeah, as a person responsible for it, you have to understand how things are going. So you do eventually need to ask for some kind of reporting and figure out, but we're trying to be as minimalistic with that as possible.
I think that's super smart. And I do also believe that there's a certain amount of trust that you can sort of build over time with folks, right? So when someone joins the team and they're new and it's sort of, whatever, first 6 months, first year, you want to see some of that reporting a little bit stronger so that you know that in future years, hey, just run with it, right? I know you're going to, you got this, right? Like, you know what you're doing, go do it. The reporting part, less important, right? Just give me a quick summary. That's great. But I think early on, right, you need to be able to sort of weigh whether you've hired the right person and all those kinds of things. So
I think there's also this term. Yeah, I think there's also this term called foreshadowing, where you kind of like do things kind of together with this person, where you are CC'd in their every email, when you invite them, whenever you do calls, like with, I don't know, partners or whatever. So they kind of learn from you and you watch their work very closely. But then over time, yeah, you should probably let this go, because the more people you get, you can just manage or babysit everyone. And yeah, that's like, as you're saying, overall, as you build trust in a person, you can just let them do their thing. And this is exactly what happened in our case with Sam, who runs our YouTube channel. My participation is very minimal. Maybe once a quarter, we would jump on a call and like bounce some ideas. I would try to be useful to him somehow. But overall, he does his own thing, and I'm so happy with that. So yeah, but it also takes like special people to be in charge of channels and like execute them flawlessly, so that you, as someone ultimately responsible for the whole thing, can like focus on someone else who needs kind of more of your help and advice and training. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
I wonder like what are some...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you about, again, back to the way you folks are marketing SparkToro. So this is basically end of the year. So I wonder if you can recall any particularly interesting or effective or anything just stood out to you in terms of the marketing campaigns you did for SparkToro that were like, maybe they generated a lot of word of mouth. Maybe they were very fulfilling for you guys personally, or maybe you saw an uplift of, I don't know, conversions or registration. So just anything interesting from, like, what are your highlights from marketing SparkToro in 2023?
Yeah. So I think probably our two biggest successes were both video this year. So I started doing a series called 5-minute whiteboards. I've got a giant whiteboard over here on the side, and I'll pull it behind myself and, rig it up. I basically do it all myself these days, right? Because SparkToro is just 3 of us, and publish those. But those followed a nice trajectory. So when I log into my Wistia account, I can see sort of, the first few have like 400 to 600 views, and then they start getting into the thousands. And I think I'm in the low thousands now, right? 2,000 to 3,000 per episode. That's really nice to see. The challenge, of course, is because it's a significantly larger time sink of mine, the consistency has been lower, especially with travel, right? So for conferences and events, if I'm out of town, sort of miss a week. So I think that's something to try and solve for next year. If there's a way that I can productionize those that is easier than the multiple hours it takes me to put the room together, put the video together, crop it, edit it, put it to production, get it onto the blog, all that kind of stuff, get the transcript edited, et cetera, et cetera. The second big win has been, I've used these for a while, but I do short 2-minute, 3-minute videos where I essentially show off the product. I use OBS, the Open Broadcast System, and it's always been quite effective, but this year has been, I think probably because of kind of the death of Twitter, the rise of LinkedIn has been incredible, right? Just, sort of people in, I would say folks in the professional world who might have made Twitter a professional place that they went, following the new ownership, noticed that, hey, Twitter is becoming, a place toxic to talk about whether you love or hate Elon, not a place to talk about roofing, contracting, marketing, and, chemical engineer, educational training, and all the sort of niche conversation is moving off of Twitter. Much of it already has. And LinkedIn seems to be picking up the slack in a big way there. And so we have benefited extraordinarily. Probably 2 or 3 years ago, I was averaging, maybe 1,000 views on a LinkedIn video. And Sunday, who's on LinkedIn on Sunday? Nobody used to be, but kind of with death of Twitter, like LinkedIn is huge on the weekends again. And I think I saw 12,000 video views for something I put up on a Sunday. So, just remarkable to see that, that happen. That's been a big rising campaign for us, and it probably will be a heavy investment next year. I think the one that's slowed down, I know you didn't ask this, but I think that, so in addition to Twitter sort of dying as a channel for us, which sucks because it was such a big, powerful part of our marketing for a long time. But the other one that is slowing for us or getting more challenging is we're noticing it is consistently harder to get emails opened and clicked through. And I think that has to do a little bit with our size growing, but also with the inundation of email marketing. So we are seeing, I suspect because we're getting more mature and because our list size is growing, we've taken a few efforts to try and trim it down, only send to the people who are consistently opening, those kinds of things. But it's a lot more work to get kind of the same results and value from our email list. We have to work much harder at like compelling messages, compelling subject lines, compelling, click-through rates. So that's been frustrating, a little surprising. I wasn't expecting it to slow quite as quickly. I think it might be part of the pandemic. Have you heard of this, the like bump and slump, right? Where during the pandemic, like everything digital was going insane, bonkers, right? So if you look at like Amazon's web traffic as a good example, right? Amazon sort of had this bump and then slump because people went back to going to local stores and like going out of their homes and doing things outside and seeing friends again, and all that, all of that stuff. Or the inverse, right? In the travel industry, the slump and bump, right? So, sort of everybody's traveling like crazy, going on vacations, wanting to see places, wanting to see people the last like 18 months, especially. And so, yeah, we definitely at SparkToro, I think with our email marketing in particular, probably with our platform overall, experienced a good amount of that bump and slump.
Bump and slump. This actually reminds me of spike of hope and flat line of nope, which is also something I kind of stole from you. I think this was in an article that you published at ProBlogger or something like that, back when you were
years and years ago.
promoting SEO, and like you were making a point that like with articles that are not relying on SEO, you get like a spike of hope and then a flat line of nope. But I always credited you, like I included this in my course, Blogging for Business, and I credited that like these funny terms come from Rand Fishkin. So yeah, that's cool. I wonder, before I ask you about eating your own dog food, I want to ask about Spark Together Summit. So I think you did it twice, right? Annually, you do it annually. So there were like 2 of them to date. So
yeah, we did one. The first one was 2021, and then, 2022, and then this one that just happened in November. Both of them were online, but next year we're planning to do it in person, in real life in Seattle. So we're looking at venues and working with the woman who ran MozCon, actually, Charlene. So should be great.
We just did a small conference in Singapore for 200 people.
Yeah.
We went down maybe 70K to to host it. I wonder if you're hoping to break even with your in-person event.
Hoping to break even. Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Okay, but what about the online? So next year you're not going to do an online event, you're going to do an in-person one.
We might end up doing both in-person and the online event as well. So the nice part about the online event is it's relatively tractable. It's not too impossible to pull off, and we do a little better. I think we did a little better than break even on the online event. We pay speakers $1,000 honorariums for the online event as well. We give our speakers the option to donate the proceeds, and then we'll send it to a charity of their choice, and many of them do, which is great as well. But the cost structure is not high, and we have some nice sponsorships. So sponsors have actually been a sort of a wonderful benefit that I had never done before. You know, at Moz, I was very, very hesitant to do sponsorships. We did it a couple of times at MozCon, but Amanda had run a bunch of sponsorship programs in the past. And so she basically put together the whole packages. She reached out to everybody. You know, she put together a structured thing. It worked quite well. I was very impressed. And, you know how it is with your team, Tim, right? If they just take something and run with it and do the whole thing and then report back to you like, hey, it worked. Here, just send money here. You got money from here. You're kind of like, wow, you're amazing. This is great. I didn't have to think about it. And that's what Amanda did on the sponsorship side. So I think next year she's probably going to be talking to folks and seeing, hey, if there's sponsorship support for both an in-person Spark Together and an online one, it makes sense. And my suspicion is the sponsorship dollars will also be well correlated enough with audience interest that we can likely make the two events work if there's demand. So yeah, that's the plan.
Think we talked with you guys about, did we end up sponsoring you? I think we were one of the sponsors of the online one. I don't remember.
That's right. Maybe were you a sponsor last year? I think that's right.
We might have sponsored the first event you did.
I think you sponsored.
But yeah, hit us up about the in-person one. We would definitely be interested to.
Yeah, that would be really fun. Yeah. We're hoping.
Yeah, when I was asking about
150 people, maybe.
Sounds cool. Yeah, and when I was asking you about Spark Together, I didn't realize that it was like a paid event, right? So you were selling tickets.
Yes. So Spark Together was, I think, quite inexpensive, but it was a paid event. It's not completely free, and that helps us obviously pay our speakers for their time. Yeah.
Because it seems whenever, I don't know, tech companies or maybe agencies do their like event or summit online, it's usually free.
Usually, that's right.
So I wonder if it's even easier to get attention of people with a paid event, because like you're doing something for money, so you kind of guarantee the quality, as opposed to like doing something free and just inviting a bunch of people who are just there for 1 hour and they don't care that much.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I think it would be very difficult to do free tickets for Spark Together, because the sort of psychological buy-in would not be the right kind of caliber of folks, right, who care that deeply about attending, was it 5.5, 6 hours, right, of online content during the day, which is, a little intense, right, to sit there and watch your screen. I mean, it thankfully is very, very engaging. Folks who go are kind of glued to the screen because the presentations are good, it moves fast, and the live chat is just off the charts good. But we do office hours, the free webinars, which are usually once every month or two. There's another one tomorrow. And we'll get between 500 and 2,000 registrants for those, depending on who's speaking. Nice. And about what. I think for Brittany's, the one about like AI and marketing. Yeah. Brittany did one earlier this year, and it was 2,000 attendees. It was just off the charts, activity. The chat was just flying, and that was great. And I think it's a perfect mix, right? To kind of mix up hey, if you want more intense, a bigger day of content, speakers who are going to be bringing essentially a paid experience, right? Like they're paid to bring you something very special, unique. Great. Spark Together is for you. We got about maybe 200-ish attendees, 210, somewhere around there. And then, office hours is 1,000 people, 2,000 people, but all free, 45 minutes to an hour, that kind of thing.
Okay. Eating your own dog food. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand SparkToro as an audience research tool. So you are looking up people with audience, or kind of places with audience where you can tap into and promote your thing. I think we actually signed up for an account a while ago because we have like a partnerships guy, and he's looking for like interesting people to partner, to like post some sponsored messages and stuff. So I'm sure both you and Amanda, well, it's a fact that you have a lot of incoming requests to do this and do that, come on this show, come on that show. So I wonder if you folks even need to use your tool. But I think you did mention that you do some research to find places you want to tap into. So basically, since we have an account, so first of all, please walk me through how you folks are using it for yourself. Oh, sure. And then secondly, maybe give me a few tips on what we can do to use SparkToro to find good places to promote Ahrefs.
Yeah, so the way we use it is essentially almost exactly how I would coach you folks to use it, which is discovery for consideration in your marketing channels and tactics. So for example, I will jump into the list of websites and social accounts, podcasts, subreddits, YouTube channels, and I will essentially search for different variants of our audience. So for example, I know a lot of the people who sign up for SparkToro use the title marketing manager. So I will use, my audience uses these words in their bio, marketing manager, and then I'll do that type of search. We started reaching more folks in PR last year when we launched the press and media section in the tool. And so I went ahead and did, okay, my audience uses these words in their title, public relations. And I actually found that audience was not quite right for us. And so I looked for public relations and marketing. Like that person needs to have public relations in their job title or role and marketing somewhere in their bio or a previous job role or whatever. And then when it filtered to that group, I found a bunch of, I think it was mostly actually podcasts and YouTube channels where I said, I want to pitch these guys. I want to be on there. And a few influential, there was like 2 or 3 very influential folks on social for that group that I ended up dropping a line to, forming connection of some kind. I think I did something with 1 or 2 of them. Mari Smith was one. So like that, that type of universe of let me go learn about my audience and then discover stuff. That's great. In your case, I would probably also do some competitive analysis. Like SparkToro has the only sort of at scale competitor that we have that's very direct is Brandwatch. And it doesn't make sense for us to go after their audience because they're so enterprise focused. So it's a little different. But in your case, right, you have multiple direct competitors who have big audiences. I would probably run through those as well. I might even pick some niche sources. You could, I don't do this as much for SparkToro, but I probably would do this in your shoes where you take, for example, let's say a website where you saw great results, right? We did a sponsorship. Maybe you did a sponsorship with, I don't know, Search Engine Land or something, or Content Marketing World, right? And so you plug in contentmarketingworld.com and you want to see who and what are the sources of influence for people who visit Content Marketing World, subscribe to that site. I would take some of those that are, high affinity and potentially put them on your list of consideration targets for outreach, for sponsorship, for pitching their podcast, for doing something together, maybe for highlighting in a video, like, hey, we're going to do an example video of how you use Ahrefs to whatever, this new feature for filtering keywords in this way. Cool. Great. Let's use as an example, this person that we know we want to get on their radar, right? We want them to mention. So we're going to mention them. We're going to ego bait them. That kind of stuff works really well.
Do we have time for one last quick question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, one last question. You just mentioned that when you find those sources of influence, you can reach out to them and offer a bunch of stuff, like be a guest on the podcast, blah, blah, blah. So this is actually the hard part. So finding those sources of influence, again, with SparkToro, I would imagine this is fairly easy. You just search around and you'll find them. So the hard part is pitching them. And since both you and Amanda, you create a lot of content and that content is not even search focused, do you have any guides and giving people ideas of once you find someone whose audience you want to get in front of, how do you approach them? What do you offer them? What kind of, payments, reimbursements, commissions you can offer them? So do you have those tangible resources to teach people what to do with those sources of influence that you'll find in SparkToro? Because I think this is very important for people to have success with your product, right?
I agree with you. And I would say we do have them, but not enough, right? If I bet if you were the director of marketing at SparkToro, you would say, get on that, do that work, make that stuff for people, right? So I have a few presentations that I've given about, optimizing outreach. I have a few blog posts. If you search for outreach, site:/sparktoro.com, you'll never find us in Google search results without adding site:/sparktoro.com because we rank for nothing. But you will find some resources. I think there's a video in the dashboard that gives people some ideas. So some resources, yes. Something comprehensive and taking you all the way through the process, no. And part of that, Tim, is because almost no two businesses, nor any two marketing managers should do it the same. This is not I just send them an email saying, hey, I want to sponsor your newsletter, or I want to be a guest on your podcast. That stuff, that kind of thing does not work. For almost everyone, it's going to be very different. It's I'm going to go to this website. Do they have an email newsletter? Do they have a podcast? Do they have a YouTube channel? Do they run an event series? Do they have a blog? Does their blog accept guest contributions? Do they ever interview people? Do they do co-marketing with anyone? Could I show up at an event and pitch them there? Do they have a popular LinkedIn page? Maybe I could. You have to do that research to figure out what are the opportunities. And then you have to know your own strengths. I'm really good at pitching people over email, or I'm terrible at cold outreach, but I'm really good at warm social intros. You know what? I'm terrible at all of that, but if I meet them in person, it's going to go great. So I'm going to show up at the same event where their CEO or founder is speaking. you will know your strengths and you will be able to research what they have to offer. And then the object of the game is making the connection between those two. That's a tough thing to teach, right? It's sort of like, I don't know, asking people to get good at making friends. Like, yeah, that's a difficult skill.
I absolutely agree with you. I also very much love the advice to play to your strengths. So if you are not good with webinars, don't pitch doing webinars to people because like it's not your thing. I know we're out of time, unfortunately. I would love to talk to you more. I think there's still so much to explore, but I want to end this with kind of a counterpoint. So yeah, like no, businesses are different and you cannot just teach everyone because there's so much to it. But even with the example, if you want to sponsor an email newsletter, there are different ways to do it. So you can send them a banner and it would have like this effectiveness. You might ask them for a blurb within their newsletter, and it can be at the top, it can be at the middle, it can be at the bottom. So it's kind of like pre-roll, mid-roll, and like what post-roll in podcast interviews. Or you can ask them for a dedicated email newsletter, and then you can buy those in packages. So there are many variables that you could like create. You could create instructions for people, walk them through those variables, and kind of give them ideas what is even possible and how you, from your experience, define the kind of effectiveness and in which cases people should use what. But yeah, we're out of time. Thanks a lot for this interview. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm actually hoping to have you back at one point so that we could like explore more topics and have more. This has been great. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tim. Thank you for having me. Would love to be back on sometime.